Hi everybody, welcome back to CMN 153. This is for our class for Tuesday the 27th, where I wanted to finish up what we were talking about in relation to advertising and marketing, and also talk about the internet. As well, I wanted to talk about journals and final project. And basically, as you know, the journals are an informal way for you to respond to the major topics that we are discussing over the course of this semester. So the first topic is advertising and public relations. So your first journal, and some of you have already submitted that, so thank you. Your first journal would be due today at midnight, the 27th. Basically, I'm asking that you write a page or so response to advertising and public relations, whether it be based on your readings from the textbook, it be based on our class videos, whether it be based on your personal experience, whether it be based on the class discussion forums, or some combination thereof. And certainly you can write more than a page, but I'm thinking ballpark about a page or so. And I'm not evaluating that for grammar or mechanics. Basically, I'm just looking at that for content so that I can give you some feedback in response to that. And it would be as if we were having a conversation on paper. Similar perhaps to the discussion forum, but the discussion forum is something that's open for the entire class to see, while the journals would be just between you and me. So by the ending of the semester, you should have commentary on the major topics that we've talked about over the course of the semester. And you know that we began by talking a little bit about just the discipline of media and popular culture. And while you aren't writing a journal about that, certainly you can reference that information at any point over the course of the semester. And you also have a final project where I am asking you to specialize or focus on a particular area in relation to media and popular culture, whether it be something that we discussed in class that you would like to develop further, or whether it be something that we didn't have a chance to discuss in class that you would like to examine, or some combination thereof. And my suspicion is that most of you are going to write a traditional academic paper, but certainly since this is a media class, you can feel free to utilize media as well in terms of your presentation. So I've had students do things like film mini documentaries, for instance, in terms of their final project. So you can think creatively, and I encourage you to contact me over the course of the semester about what your ideas are and how things are proceeding. And while you've got up until the last day of class, certainly you can hand in the final course project early. And the earlier the better, because if you can hand it in early enough and I can return it to you early enough, you do have the option of doing a revision. But that said, I have the handout, so to speak, that I would have given you if we were meeting live for the final course project. I just uploaded that into our syllabus and other documents folder, and I just wanted to read that to you, but you can access it there. That the course project is a written critical analysis of the relationship between media and popular culture, but feel free to suggest other creative approaches for your analysis. You just need to have it approved by me. Written course projects, if you go that route, approximately 4 to 5 pages in length. I've given some very general topics as suggestions, but feel free to create your own topic. The following are only suggestions, so feel free to adapt, combine, or dismiss. And do discuss the topic with me before you begin. And if you are using outside resources, that means that you are quoting, and that means that you need to use the MLA, or the Modern Language System of parenthetical documentation, which I hope is something that you reviewed in your introductory composition class, but I also will be talking about it as well. We use the MLA for the humanities, and that includes a class like media and popular culture. And the syllabus talks about formatting specifications, the 1-inch margins, double space, a cover page that is just a separate sheet of paper that lists your name, the paper title, the paper should have a title, my name, the due date. So, and again, we'll review these as we get a little bit closer to the final project. But I wanted you at least to begin at this point considering what you could do for the final project. And you might want to discuss media. You might want to focus on a particular kind of media, something like a music video, for instance, or a documentary film, or a video game. And discuss the messages really, that it gives to and about our culture. Or perhaps you wanted to talk about a cultural group. You wanted to focus on a particular cultural group, something like teenagers or African Americans or healthcare providers, and discuss how this group is presented and represented in the media. Or maybe you wanted to talk about one theme in popular culture, something like food or beauty or sex, and discuss how this theme is presented in media. Advertising, as I indicated before, is really the glue that holds all media together. So perhaps you might want to focus on advertising itself. Perhaps the advertising for a particular product, such as cars or toys or medication, and discuss how this product is presented in the media. Regardless of what you do, you want to do analysis. You want to analyze the words, the images, and the audio, because there's more than just text in terms of delivering message that correspond to the topic you've chosen. So some things to consider, and this might sound familiar to you because they're known as the 5 W's of journalism. These are the questions that journalists ask themselves when they are putting together an article. Who is the intended audience of the message that you happen to be examining? And who are the producers of that particular message? What? Identify the intended but also the unintended messages given to audience. When? Identify when these messages are delivered to your audience. Where? Identify where these messages are shown to the audience. How? Identify how these messages are presented to the audience and why. Identify why these messages have cultural impact in our society. And what you want to do is evaluate the significance of your findings. Again, at the beginning of the semester, we talked about how you could utilize things like the scientific method to go about analyzing media and popular culture. And Gene Kilborn gave us a really good example of how one could go about media studies. So that's not necessarily the only way to proceed. But that was yet another reason why I wanted you to watch that documentary. Not only because it talks about advertising, which was the topic that we are discussing, but it also is a good example of how to take media and popular culture and view it from an academic perspective. So last class, we talked a little bit about her 40th anniversary and that documentary that panel discussion about her documentary, I thought was particularly good because it reviews the work that she's done over 40 years. She's done 4 documentaries entitled Killing Us Softly. Her most recent is Killing Us Softly 4. And if you wanted to watch that, as I had indicated last class in our notes below, you can access that through the GCC library database. It does need to be updated, and as we saw in the panel discussion, there's lots of excitement for the possibility that she might do a Killing Us Softly 5, where she could focus on social media, which is probably some of the biggest differences that have occurred since her Killing Us Softly 4 came out approximately 10 plus years ago. I also wanted you to, in terms of advertising, think about a documentary that appeared on PBS Frontline. It's somewhat dated. This was in 2004, and it was entitled The Persuaders. The argument being that advertisers are basically trying to persuade us, not just to buy product, but also to persuade us that their product will give us physical and emotional satisfaction. And while certainly you can watch the documentary in its entirety, and you can see that I've included the link below, there are specific sections that I wanted you to watch that I think are particularly relevant. So if you didn't want to watch the documentary in its entirety, once you get to that particular link on PBS Frontline, from minute 326 to minute 453, again, this is in the notes below, it talks a little bit about how advertising has become our environment and basically has become clutter. The history of advertising is discussed from minute 1058 to minute 1721, so that's a good overview of the history of advertising. Market research, which is related to advertising, but basically it's examining consumer behaviors. This is a particularly fascinating section. This is on section 20, or from point 2835 to minute 36 04, and also minute 3750 to minute 4517. And then lastly, about narrowcasting, how advertising has gone from broadcasting, which was a farming term, where basically you would put seeds out over a broad area. And that's usually how messages were sent in the media. But of course, because of the advent of things like the internet, we're now able to have very specific messages to very specific demographic groups, and that's on minute 50:08 to minute 52:16. Again, feel free to see the entire documentary. It's approximately an hour or so long, but the half hour or so that I selected is the half hour that I think is most relevant for what we were talking about in relation to advertising. And then we move forward to the internet, and I had indicated that I try to put things in chronological order in class, though there were some places like music where there really is some difficulty in terms of deciding a chronology. But usually we think about books as the first mass media outlet. And when we get to the music section towards the ending of the semester, I'll talk a little bit about why I placed music in the area that I placed it in. It seems that the internet, as we all know, has taken over all media and is completely transformed and is transforming media. So it seems like the internet is a good catch-all to begin with, and then to get to the actual specific forms of media. And basically, what the internet is a linked, decentralized network of phones and cables and satellites that carry digital information that this information is supposed to be uncensored worldwide. So you can have two-way communication and one-to-many communication. And it was labeled the information superhighway in the 1990s. I can say that I was around for the advent of the internet. And I remember how we talked about that basically as an information superhighway, it was going to be used as a repository for knowledge. But of course, we know that the internet is much broader and grander than that. It started as a U.S. military government project, believe it or not, in the 1960s, an advanced research project agency known as ARPANET, for military and academic communication. The idea was that in the event of a national emergency, there would be a decentralized network for communication. How ironic that one of the most centralized agencies in the world, our government, ended up creating one of the most decentralized systems for communication. And then email, electronic mail, and basically was birthed. And this was very good for academic communication and also very good for personal communication. Now it's mostly a place for spam, where mostly the junk mail that we used to receive in physical form, and perhaps still do on some level, has basically been replaced by email boxes. Of course, it also is very valuable in terms of workplace communications and academia as well. And microprocessors, the miniature circuits that process and store electronic signals. They were invented in 1971. So I was born in 1967. So basically I was able to witness the birth of the internet. Not that I was aware of microprocessors in 1971. But certainly they have influenced where we are now. Now, the World Wide Web became a text data linking system organized in the late 1980s, and it's why we're able to use the internet with such efficiency. And it was created by a software engineer. His name is Tim Berners-Lee at CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, Switzerland. And actually, next class, I'm going to have a brief video that talks a little bit about him and his importance with creating the World Wide Web. Now, when we think about the expansion of the internet, that led to things like web browsers, software that would allow us to navigate the web. I do remember the days where it was actually possible to count the number of websites that existed on the web. That obviously is no longer possible. And then internet service providers, particularly AOL, America Online. It was the most popular internet service provider before broadband, and it really led to wide use of the internet. Of course, broadband allows for quick download of multimedia content. And search engines, of course, became necessary based on the incredible amount of content on the internet. And these are automated mathematical algorithms to locate web content. Probably Google is the leader, but of course, there are other options that are out there as well. Now, the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and this is going to be an important date that I'm going to be talking about over the course of the semester, removed restrictions in telecommunications. This was incredibly important because now an individual could own an basically unlimited amount of telecommunications. This means that we are living in the ironic situation now where we've never had more access to information and we've never had less access to information. We've never had more access to information just because of the incredible wealth of content that exists on the internet. But we've never had less access to information because so much of that content is delivered by a very small group of mega corporations. So that has somewhat changed through social media and the ability of the individual to be able to garner audiences themselves. But the Telecommunications Act is also going to be very important when we start talking about television, and particularly when we talk about a cable network by the name of Fox and how that influenced journalism. But those things will be coming up. So basically, digital communication, it translates images, text, and sound electronically into binary numbers, which are zeros and ones. And of course, in our current day, social networks are probably the most important, or one of the most important pieces of the internet. I expect that artificial intelligence is what's coming up in the future, as many individuals do. But we think about social media and the platforms that encourage users to create content, giving an incredible amount of power to the user. And also it encourages users to comment and to interact with one another, which again has led to the ironic situation where we've never had more possibility for social interaction, and yet social interaction is so often hampered by the internet. Began with things like blogs, where digital content was posted in chronological order. We went to wikis, where we've got collaborative website content. Wikipedia is probably one of the best examples of that. An incredible idea that knowledge could be shared, that one didn't necessarily have to have a particular level of expertise or access to a particular organization in order to be able to share their knowledge. An incredibly democratic idea. But it also led to difficulties, because just because an individual wants to share information, that doesn't necessarily mean that that information has been vetted, that that information is accurate, which is one of the great difficulties of the internet. Anybody can post anything, which is the wonderful but also terrible thing of it, because what's posted may not necessarily be truthful. And then, of course, virtual worlds, interactions in 3D digital environments, and that's probably going to be the stepping stone for artificial intelligence environments, which is basically where the major players in the internet, and usually we think about names like Elon Musk, and we think about Mark Zuckerberg, and we think about Bill Gates as Jeff Bezos as well, and basically transformed the internet into a place for commerce, and that completely changed buying and selling in our society. It doesn't escape me that these individuals are all privileged Caucasian white male. I think that the internet has been very much reflective of that particular viewpoint because it was created from that particular viewpoint. That's not to say that things aren't changing. TikTok is a great example where many African Americans have been driving TikTok. But that said, I think that the internet has led to perhaps more challenges than benefits, which is not to say that the internet hasn't transformed the world in a beneficial way. Certainly, we could not be interacting right now in the middle of a pandemic if we didn't have options like the internet and Zoom, which was a brilliant idea, by the way, from Bill Gates from business perspective. And that's not to say that there wasn't some altruism involved as well, but in the early days of the the pandemic, he basically gave Zoom away, unlimited Zoom, for free for individuals to be able to connect with one another. And that basically has become the platform for use, both personally as well as educationally and professionally for interaction. So media convergence is something that we are going to be talking about throughout the entire semester, that technological merging of mass media content. And that basically has occurred through the internet. And some of the concerns with the internet, things like the digital divide, the disparity between those who do and do not have digital access, which we saw very clearly again during the times of the pandemic, where individuals who didn't have broadband were definitely at a disadvantage, let alone individuals who didn't have access to any kind of internet. Net neutrality, the idea that every website and user has the same internet access and speed. It's supposed to be a democratic and egalitarian platform. And it's something that Tim Berners-Lee certainly wanted with his creation of the World Wide Web. Which again we'll talk about further, but there have been lots of business interests that have challenged consumer interests, arguing that the business interests have perhaps a greater stake in having greater access and speed. And there are pros and cons to that, but it certainly is problematic if we think about the internet as a democratic vehicle. And of course, the idea of handheld computers, mobile devices, and that leads to another major player in the world of technology, and that would be Steve Jobs, who basically has transformed the idea of how we communicate with one another, from the desktop computer to the portable computer, in effect, that just also happens to be a telephone, though I think sometimes people forget that it is actually possible to make a telephone call, because we've all become so accustomed to things like texting, for instance. Privacy issues, things like internet identity theft and phishing, spyware, where secret information is gathered through software, data mining, where you've got data collecting systems, and cookies, the automatic collection and transfer of information profile. And that's not to say those are the only issues facing the internet. Certainly with the advent of social media and hate speech, and the way that the social media has been used to influence things like politics, and even education. We obviously see how the internet has led to a whole host of issues that were never visualized by the creators of the internet. I wanted you to watch a video that's entitled The Internet Revolution and the Digital Future Technology documentary. It was made in 2018. It's approximately an hour long or so. So watching that, as well as The Persuaders, would be about an hour and a half or so. It gives a good overview of the history of the internet, where the internet is now, and where the internet is likely to go in the future. And for our attendance question, and this will be for Wednesday the 28th, 1 p.m. on our class discussion forum. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing the internet, and why? And obviously the internet has many, many challenges associated with it. But based on your perspective, whether it be based on your readings, your actual usage of the internet, our class discussions, our class videos, or some combination thereof, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the internet, and why? And feel free to have conversations about this with family, friends, and even with your social media audiences, because it would be interesting to see what others feel about this as well, if you wanted to incorporate that into your arguments. Again, you aren't required to respond to your classmates' responses, but I do ask that you read your classmates' responses, and you also read my responses to them. I will respond to everyone, so that you get an idea of what it is that we would have talked about in class. So I hope you're all doing well. I'm doing well, and basically the next hour and a half or so is for you watching at least the sections that I've highlighted from The Persuaders, as well as the Internet Revolution and Digital Future Technology. Take care. Bye-bye.